So now we're going to spend a couple of slides talking about the big debate, metadata standardization. The big debate and the fencing and everything might be, overblowing the drama just a little bit, but there is some tension or, sort of different schools of thought and of course, different answers for different situations about whether or not metadata should be standardized. So, what do I mean by metadata standardization? What I mean by that is some metadata schemas that you'll see are meant to be sort of one size fits all. So examples of those would be the Dublin Core, which I mentioned before, ISBD, which is described in your textbook, as is the Dublin Core and several others, MARC and EAD, which you looked at one or both of those for activity one. So those tend to be more general, generic, standardized, one size fits all kinds of metadata schema. They're meant to be applied and adopted in a wide variety of settings. In some cases, such as the Dublin Core, the schema can be customized to the needs of the organization. So Dublin Core has a set of, I think it's roughly 15 core elements. That means that any organization that adopts Dublin Core as their metadata standard uses those 15 elements, but then they can also create any specialized elements that they want to. The problem with that is that if they do create specialized elements that sort of describe particular characteristics that would be needed for that organization, those specialized Dublin Core elements would not be shareable in the wider Dublin Core community. So if you're sharing your cataloging, then your individualistic or your specialized cataloging isn't going to get shared. That might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the characteristics of your organization, how protective they are of their cataloging or data, or it could be a bad thing if your organization sort of wants to participate more and be seen as a player in the information world, but their individual contributions won't be seen because they'll be scraped out as, sort of idiosyncratic or individualistic Dublin Core elements. Another one size fits all standardized metadata schema is MARC, which is another one of the ones you explored in your activity if you chose the MARC activity. If you didn't choose to do that activity when you did activity one, I suggest now that you go at some point and look in the discussion board and just follow the link. You have to log into Cataloger's desktop. But if you look at the list of, in MARC they call them fields instead of elements, but it's the same thing. If you look at the list of available fields for MARC, it is overwhelming. There are, I think, a few hundred different metadata fields available in a MARC record. So how standardized is that really? A few slides ago I said that it would be preposterous to try to create a metadata scheme that that captures every conceivable metadata element or every conceivable characteristic that an information might have in this collection. But that's kind of what MARC has ended up doing just because it's been around so long, I think since the 1960s, and it's just been added to and modified through the huge revolutions in technology and the huge surge in the amount of content that we've seen since MARC was created. So that's why this RDA thing is coming up, which we'll talk about in a few weeks when we get back into cataloging stuff. RDA is meant to replace MARC, but so many organizations for dozens of years have dedicated their technology and their human resources and their cataloging to creating MARC records that they're not really jazzed about the idea of switching to an entirely new system. So that's one of the sort of side issues that comes up with the standardization of metadata. But what we're really getting at here in this debate over the standardization of metadata is it a good idea to try to create or use a metadata schema that's meant to be used by everybody, that's really general and generic. ISBD is the metadata schema that sort of identifies the bibliographic characteristics that are frequently seen in library catalogs. So when you see a library catalog record that has like author, title, subject, publication date, publisher, number of pages, those things that you typically see usually come from ISBD. And ISBD elements can be extracted out of a more comprehensive MARC record. But those are meant to be used by pretty much anyone and everyone, in a certain organization. Sorry about the pause here. Now, specialized metadata schemas can be, they can really be down to any level of specialization by some stretch of the imagination. I said that EAD, Encoded Archival Description, is a standardized metadata schema, but you could say that it's specialized because it only pertains to archives and creating archival finding aids, but it's not dedicated to creating particular kinds of archival finding aids. It's more general than that. So that one sort of falls in the middle. Of course, this is a spectrum and not a polar thing. There are several examples of specialized metadata schemas in your textbook. I think they're in the metadata chapter. FGDC is a digital geospatial metadata schema. VRA Core is for cataloging visual resources, and so on and so forth. There are about as many specialized metadata schemas available, not necessarily easy to find, but available for almost any reason you can think of for cataloging books or different kinds of collections. Any given collection might create its own metadata schema. And the good thing about that is that they can identify whatever characteristics are useful to their users and whatever characteristics they have the technical and human resources to identify and catalog using their metadata schema. Let's talk about this more on the next slide.